Hello, welcome back to a new video. It's going to be a rant video, so if I publish it, I guess I was happy with it. So we are going to talk a little bit about, again, sort of a rumor, or let's say a YouTuber, who is going to claim or is claiming that Android will be given on the Sony cameras. So this rant is a little bit about why I think this is not true. But in the end, it might turn out to be true. So I think his logic is flawed, and I think he's just doing it to get attention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I do want to sort of sketch from a software point of view, and I've been actively programming for the last 35 years, or 40 probably if we don't count for money. So what happened before, and why do I think it might actually happen, but not in the way that he's sort of explaining, and also probably not for the reasons why he's explaining. So let's get going. Let me. I'm sorry, I'm in a different setup. I'm getting into 3D printing, as you might have noticed on the channel, and my normal YouTube area is kind of a mess at the moment, so that I'm using this setup which I normally use for meetings and Skype calls and stuff. But I am making it better, so I can do things like switching and putting myself back into the picture, which we can use. If the sound is a little bit off, it might be because I'm still fiddling with some stuff. And you might also hear my 3D printer, so it's printing stuff, as you can see. It's actually printing little parts for the ATEM switch that I'm using in this setup, which I still had laying around, so I can use that to do stuff like you're seeing now. So let's get going and try to explain this a little bit, what I think is happening and why. So I went to the Sony website, mostly to show you the switcher, to be fair. But one thing we noticed, that indeed the Xperia phones are getting closer and closer to becoming real cameras. We don't see any professional cameras here, we just see the vlogging camera being announced and the phone stuff. Let me go back to me just being me and turning Pip off. What is happening? I think what is happening is that Sony really doesn't know what to do with their mobile phone line. Clearly, cameras are getting more important, so yes, these two things are growing together. But that does not mean that what is being claimed, that Sony will put Android on alpha cameras. Why? Well, history is one of them. All the Sony cameras up to, I think, the Sony a6300 were running Android. Let me repeat that. They were already running Android. And the moment he is talking about when they got finally good enough was the moment that Sony dropped Android, because it gave too many problems. Now we are almost a decade later, so that doesn't mean that the problems will still be there. I'm not saying that you can't make a camera based on Android. In fact, I think it's a very, very valid argument that you could redesign a camera based on Android and grow. You could make the argument that Android and iPhones, if they just put in a bigger sensor and tune the software a little bit, they will be pretty darn good cameras. No doubt about it. But it does not explain what Sony might do and what Sony is going to do, and I think what Sony should do if I were a software designer over there and if I would be running these teams. Sorry if it becomes a little bit long-winded. Me being me, that's what it is. So what happened and how would they return to Android? Now let's look at this practically. Practically, I don't think if there are still people working there from the period where they were using Android and they ditched it for pure Linux, which is the underlying system to both of them, if they are still working there, they don't want to go back. They don't want to risk their current platform, which they are still putting in a lot of time, by sort of switching again to Android. So I don't think that's going to happen. That would be weird. It will be introduce instabilities and all kinds of stuff that they don't want, assuming that they could solve the problems they had before. But they have an interesting sort of option. Let me first talk also a little bit about the other thing, what he sees as proof or building up of proof, that Sony already had claims in an interview which was kind of weirdly worded, so I doubt that what what he claims it said, they actually said, is that they already had the most of the AF problems solved, and they just kept it back for Canon and Nikon. I don't think that's what happened. What most likely happened, if you go back to, for example, the first time that Sony showed eye detect, they showed it on a PC. It was only hooked up to a monitor, and you couldn't see the camera. They were just showing the stuff running in a video based on the overlay. I am 99% sure it was running on a PC or some more powerful hardware to run the algorithms. So I think if Sony now says we already had this stuff ready, that is true, but you have to also take that into context. That might have meant, and I think that's very likely, that the software was ready. They knew it would happen in, let's say, 2 years, but their platform was not ready. What does that mean? That means that the CPU that they needed were not in the current cameras, that the power usage, they were still using mostly the old battery, the smaller battery. So they probably had a problem running the stuff on their current cameras. So they had to grow into the algorithm. So yes, they had the technology ready, and yes, they theoretically could deploy it, but the cameras were not ready from watt versus heat versus power metaphor. But they fully knew it would happen in 2 years because they had their own plans, and Moore's law sort of defines that we see the doubling and the power usage and the heat going down. So it would make perfect sense that they claim this now, or they say this now, but they were actually meant that they had the technology ready, but it was not ready to be deployed. So that's most likely what happened there, would be my guess. I doubt it was done just to... They wouldn't have mind, but I doubt they... So they would have kept the progress secret, but not that they already could do it in production versions. I highly doubt that. So getting back to the other sort of claim, that they will jump back to Android pretty soon. And here we're going to end up in this rant that I'm going to say that he might be right, but not in the way that you expect. So what we are seeing is that their phone department is growing to their camera part. But what I suspect that might happen is using something, let's call it a proxy mode, because that's probably the easiest way to explain it. And I think if you look at Blackmagic, it's a good example. They are doing it this way, and it totally makes sense. So we already decided, or I decided, that most likely the camera team doesn't want to jump back into Android until it's either totally proven that there is no other way, or that they can do it in a way that is safe. Now, the safest way from a software design point is not to do it at all. I know this sounds weird, but let me explain. So there's two ways of doing things. There's either that you jump the whole platform, right? So you basically throw one out and put the other one in with all the problems that they had before, the bugs, the instability, etc., etc. Why would you do that? And also the team has to stop working on the current version, switch over, retrain, all kinds of stuff, right? Or what you do is you create a communication layer between the two of us. So you decouple basically the camera part and the control part. And this is handy for lots of reasons, which I explain later. And I was mentioning Blackmagic because that's what they are doing. They have a lot of switchers, but they decoupled their GUI layer from the let's say the hardware layers. And of course there's an interface between it. And what we are seeing now, and I'm using it at the moment, so for example, I can zoom in or zoom out. Let's not make myself too big. I'm using an iPad, and the iPad is running a program called Monitor Plus, which is a brilliant program. It has almost all the controls now, and I could have all the controls. So it could the Monitor Plus people could make an app that looks 99% the same as your back of your camera of your Sony. And once they reach that point, well, what's the difference? And I'm saying this not to be funny, but really as an option of how to do the development. So what do you need for that? Well, you need a better networking layer and you need a better communication protocol. Guess what? Sony stopped their open source, or at least open SDK development, which I was part of, 3 years ago. And they said, probably maybe 4 years ago with all this... virus thing going on. We forgot how fast time moves. But they stopped the plan. Everybody was kicked out, and they said, okay, we are going to redesign it. And we are seeing that today. We are seeing that in this camera. We're seeing that in apps like Monitor Pro. We are seeing that they are totally revamping their networking protocols. So once all the commands are available on this network layer, then they can also use that internally. So in a way, Monitor Plus is more like proof of concept than it is any hint what's inside of Sony. So let's assume this logic, that the camera team is just doing their thing. They might be interested in this, they might not even know. Might be just management who has this plan, or they don't have this plan, because I think the best development platform is basically development by accident. You just make different parts, and by accident they sort of line up. And I think this might be what is happening. So Sony cameras is just doing their thing with their own software and hardware and stuff like that. They're also, because of the market reasons, creating a new network layer, which is far more complete and better than the old one. And by the end, there's either external apps that can talk to it, including their own app, which we all think, not that great. Monitor Plus is way better, for example. But once all the functions are there, there's no reason why Sony could not use that as the third sort of part of this by accident development. So that would mean that the camera people are just doing their thing, like they've done, and they keep doing. The networking part that they built is good enough for a GUI part or a GUI Android part to be hooked on top of it. Can we prove that this is happening? No. But it has a lot of advantages. A, we know that it's possible because we already have Android and iPhone apps that actually do this, right? Again, I'm calling out Monitor Plus because I think it's one of the best one at the moment, which is 90% already there. So we know that it is possible to create this platform in the camera part, use this networking part, and then attach a quite simple sort of Android, let's say, phone. It could actually be a phone, and the whole Xperia stuff. What is it called actually? Let's go back to my Xperia. Yeah. These phones could actually be their total prototype because it could use USB-C even internally. They probably will kick it out at some point, but that could be it. So I guess the 3D printer is done because I get it on my iPhone. My Apple Watch. So it is totally possible that they're doing the development like this. And the phone team, which needs the camera part, because the phone team is not doing that great, to be fair. So they want to creep more to the camera part, and they clearly are getting access to some of their algorithms, some of their visual styling. So they are definitely getting parts. At some point, they will probably also get access to the chips, right? Even if this is over this bridge. In fact, we are not even sure that inside some of these phones, they are not already doing this. There is no proof that the camera part is already not decoupled on a small Linux, because that's what the Alpha camera is. So a small Linux part separated from the Android phone part. We simply don't know. But why would this make sense? Well, that means that this team can just do what they want. This team can do what they want. And at some point, when this team has all the features and the management, or even one person in management has said, I already planned this way ahead, or I just noticed this. Both is possible. That's good about this plan. This part, they could actually then say, well, let's pick one camera that's not too dangerous and is actually a camera where it makes sense that you can upload stuff to your Instagram and have all the Android apps, and it will be much more integrated and modern. Which camera would you pick? Well, we are not going to pick an Alpha 1. That will be way too crazy and way too risky. It will also upset this team at the camera part. So it might be, for example, already, because they already showed a 1-inch sensor, so that would not be weird in a mobile phone. So let's pick a camera that has not been released for quite a while, but I think still very interesting. What about the RX10 Mark V? So that's the quite big camera, so you can put some stuff in there with the, 24-600, made for travel. Which actually makes sense because it's quite a good video camera if you're traveling in just $1,500, $2,000 range. if you're out and about, if you're on trips, might be a perfect camera. And they would just give it to the phone team and say, well, here you have the hardware. Try to hook it up. Basically put your phone inside the box which was already there. Because we know that all the other stuff, if it's running the new operating system, is already there. The networking parts are already there, etc., etc. So, and then they could sort of merge these teams together based on that. I hope this makes sense. But it would be a very easy and not dangerous way of integrating if these teams getting closer together. And it would also not be very risky, because if this team fails or this team fails, well, of course this team fails, they have a problem. But if this mobile phone fails in integrating or getting closer and closer to what the cameras are doing in controls and the speed and the feeling it gets, the direct feedback, then no harm done. You will just have phones which have alpha-like features, but never really making it. But the moment it gets on par, they could sort of merge these two together. And I think that's what most likely will happen. Why is the decoupling of the screen part, let's call it the GUI part, and the camera part, why might that be also a better way than totally integrating it? Except for all the development things I already talked about. And the risk involved in that, and the hard feelings and stuff like that. Well, think about the different lines that Sony has. Let's talk about a few of them. So first one, let's say the professional line of cameras, right? So the movie cameras and the video cameras. So the movie cameras, if we look at the Venice, for example, that's definitely where they are moving to take the sensor, let's call it the camera part. It's not really true, but they could make it the camera part in a way, and separate that from the rest of the body, right? That's what they are doing. Well, that basically means that you are decoupling the GUI part, among other things. So I could totally see within the Venice line or cheaper versions of that. I'm not sure if we're done in the line of the FX9 or the FX6, where actually the monitoring part and the control part is separated from the real camera part. And then it makes totally sense that they're using this proxy mode. Again, I'm calling it proxy mode because I think that's probably the easiest for people to understand. This proxy mode with this in-between connection part to put it in a different part of your rig, right? Either by Sony, simply because it's easier to develop and it's still in hardware, if that makes sense, or really separated like the external monitor would be on a video camera. Another area where it makes sense, gimbals. If you're on a gimbal, it makes perfect sense, even if it's on a wire, but also wireless, to have it separated from your main body. It kills weight, it gives you more control, and you can touch the screen without your gimbal going like crazy, right? It makes perfect sense. Another one, drones. If you want to do drones, which Sony is now doing, it might make sense to take the screen off at all, because, well, if it's flying, you can't touch the screen and you can't see it. So it might make sense to put the screen on the controller, right? Again, if you want to have the complete control, you want to have access that way. And you have to do the signal anyway, so sending a few extra signals for the control. Well, not that easy, because you have not that difficult, because you already have to send stuff to the drone, and you have to return it back in a pretty good speed and a pretty good reaction time and data throughput, because otherwise your video or your control signals will not work, right? So makes perfect. In fact, the video signal is already being sent back to the controller, so that's most of the work. So you only have your control lines, and trust me, setting your aperture or your shutter speed does not demand any more speed of the network than you already need for the controlling your control of the drone. So I think that's actually what might happen, and that's why I wouldn't say frustrated, but I can totally see at some point that his claim is becoming true, but not in the way that he's outlining, and definitely not based on his gut feeling of what he saw somebody say somewhere, and this is their master plan. I doubt that they have a master plan. They might have different development branches going on, which I love as a software developer, might by accident integrate. Let me give you another example of by accident integrate. The moment that you sync everything to a database, or in these days to the cloud, you almost by accident create a distributed platform that you can use, right? You would normally just say, well, I have an application with all the parts in it. Let's say you want to scan a CD. I did it 20 years ago, so it's example that popped into my head. Scan a CD and want to put it online. In the old days it could be one program, but at some point you're putting it in a database. Let's call a database a cloud. And hey, I can have two machines. One just scanning the CD, a really stupid one with a small little box on it. It would just send it to the database, and this one automatically picks it up because it sees a change in the database and it sees that it can now work together. Hey, now that we did this, we can put in 10 of these CDs, and they all just put it in the database, and the other programs are just, or other nodes, we will probably call this nodes, the other nodes are just looking at the database and they see, hey, a new CD file popped up. It doesn't know where it came from, it doesn't know who did it. Well, it doesn't need to know, but you could find out, but it doesn't need to know. It's just there, it just picks up the job and starts working on it by putting it online. And that's a development method would be a wrong word, but a development reality that might be happening inside of Sony. So one team is just doing their thing, not taking any risks in their platform, making more features, newer features, but not going to Android. They also are making a network, it's probably an external program and might even be another team. They're also making a networking module. The networking module takes everything which that team is doing and making it available on the API on the different ports, so the USB, the Wi-Fi, maybe in the future even HDMI like Blackmagic is doing. So that interface is available, and another team, in this case the phone team, is stealing parts from the bins bag from the other team, has access to the API and can just program it. And like I said, take a look at something like Monitor Plus. Think about that they don't have access to all the commands. So for example, they can't go into the menus, but that's just probably already in there. They just know the codes for it. Or if it's not in there, it will be in there soon. For the rest, they can control most of the camera already. So that means that they could in fact make a phone or an Android part that actually does what we need to do. And if you think about it, how much bigger is your LCD on the back? If you think about the thickness and the width and even the weight, how much bigger actually is that as your phone? I'm not saying that they're going to put a phone on top of your part, but just to think about how small this actually could be. So could these two modules or these two systems with a little bit of wire in between be inside the camera? Sure. Is that the safest way to develop? I'm pretty sure. And I think that's what might happen in a few years. I don't think it's a master plan that they are doing. If some managers have that in their back pocket, in their mind, that we might end up here, that's pretty smart and might be true. But I don't think it's like a big master plan to take out Canon and Nikon. I think that's just silly. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I put this online if I think the rant is ranty enough, and at least I got it out of my system. If you have questions or whatever was unclear, please let me know. Like I said, I didn't prepare this much. I just turned on the camera because I was waiting for the 3D printer. Let's see if it's really done. I should be able to scrub back here. Oh yeah, it's done. Where am I? I'm over there. Yeah. Indeed, it's done. As you can see, it's another part like this one, because the small switcher has to be plumped in on two parts, otherwise it will drop down. So I'm going to clean that up and install it. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye bye.